Welcome to our PRBI live session today. I'm your host Arunjit Ratan, and today we take on startup PR and how it has pivoted to meet the changing demands of 2021. While the PR industry changes to catch up with the changing media landscape, has the startup industry on the client side really caught up with it, or are they still sending you the old RFPs? Right? And to help us decode this today, joining us from Chicago for the live session is a dynamic PRBI member, Ellyn Caruso, founder of Caruso PR. A little bit about her before we add her on. Ellyn is a third generation communication professional who brings 30 years of PR experience developing programs, crafting content to market B2B, B2C, and nonprofit brands. She leads the agency with innovative ideas that embrace technology and keep pace with today's new challenges and opportunities in communication. A very hands on approach, she looks at developing creative programs that encompass a wide range of communication tactics. Among her many honors and awards, she's earned platinum, gold, and honorable mentions at the Herms Creative Awards for a variety of client work. She's also the recipient of the Leonardo da Vinci Award of Excellence, and since 2017, Caruso PR has been named among the top PR firms in Chicago by media houses. So, without much ado, let me add her on and we can get started on this awesome conversation. Hi, Ellen, how are you doing?
Hi, Henry. Thank you so much for having me on. This is great.
So good to have you here today with us. It looks like it's a bright, sunny morning out there.
It is. We have a beautiful, sunny, wintry Chicago day. Taking it. Cold, but pretty.
Awesome. So before we get started on the subject, I want to understand from you, what got you started in PR? I mean, you spent 30 years in it. And what initially attracted you to the field? Why did you choose PR?
Sure. Well, I come from a rather unique place. I think you mentioned in the wonderful introduction that I actually am a third generation communications professional, meaning people come from a family of doctors or lawyers. My family includes generations of people that were in advertising, journalism, and public relations. My dad happened to be one of the co-owners and presidents of one of the largest independent PR agencies in the US when I was growing up. So I kind of got my salts learning about that at a very young age, spending a lot of time as a kid traveling through press rooms and on conventions, because back then they took the whole family out to those events. And I just got hooked, and I love it, and built up from there.
That must have been some interesting childhood.
It was, which was an interesting way to learn things. And I thought everybody did things like that. I didn't know any better.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've been in the industry, I think I would say longer than 30 years. Yeah. Because since you started as a kid, pretty much I'll be counting those years as experience as well, because I remember my first press conference experience, which was absolutely terrifying.
Start hanging around in my dad's office when I was about age 7, collating and stapling those and putting together the old press clips back before we were all digital, basically putting them on. So I got a flavor early on, just for fun, and I just loved it. And when they grabbed them different conventions, and then obviously when I was in high school and college and whatnot, had other positions.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was a good.
So tell me, how have you seen the PR industry evolve over the last, couple of decades? I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes happen. So can you help us figure out, what are the, let's say, the good changes that have happened, and what are the changes that you wish did happen?
Well, you're right. There have been many on so many levels, mostly in the tactics and the techniques, and I'll set that aside for a second. But I think the good part, or the core of what I see, having been around for a while, is that a lot of the strong principles behind good public relations exist still today and needs to be baked in to all of the new tactics and technology and gadgets, if you will, that we're all as practitioners and companies are using to spread the word and create initiatives and build their brand and protect it. So I think going back to really understanding that core of what you're trying to do, who you're trying to reach, your target audience, and what you're trying to say are really key and remain stronghold, as well as the principles of understanding that public relations is really helping to change or persuade people to change a behavior, whether that's to buy something, to go out and do something, to take an action, to do this or that. And all of these different ways are part of that. So I think it's important to remind people, even today, with some of the new tactics that seem very simple, which are never simple because it's communications, come to light. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah. So having seen so many changes happen out there, what keeps you in PR?
I think I just always like the variety of subject matter and learning so much about many new things and staying abreast of how I've always absorbed information kind of like a sponge. And I think a good PR person is kind of like that you're always learning new things and finding out what's going on in different subject matters. And I like to apply that to client A, B, C, or we're trying to track and I think I've always been attracted to storytelling and ways to get those across in different ways. So that's what keeps me interested and engaged. And the fact that we're doing new things and integrating technology, which I had to learn from the get-go here, but it's great. It's never too old to learn more things, and I think it's terrific. So
Absolutely. And I think stories are at the heart of it. While the medium might change, stories still remain. Yeah. So
yeah.
I also read when you sent me your profile that you use your own earlier.
I'm sorry, you're picking up a second.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So when I read through your profile, I also understood that you started off on your own, but at some point of time you decided to join forces with a family business. So what prompted you to change direction at that point of time, or encouraged you to remain or expand your PR entrepreneurship?
Actually, just to clarify that, I worked in different agencies, including the one my father headed up, and also other entities, businesses, and nonprofits, and different associations, Fortune 200. And then basically, when I was raising kids, I wanted to continue, in this career, and technology wasn't quite what it was, today. So freelancing on an ongoing basis was a little bit difficult. So, but becoming a solo practitioner or a solo consultant is really what I did for many years. And then I got to the point where I thought I really needed to I wanted to grow, and I needed some employees, and I needed more place to be. So we, created Caruso PR as an entity and in and of themselves. So yeah, that was how we. And definitely, on my own. So we're a small firm by size, but with a group of senior hands-on, like many boutiques, about 5 of us, and try and work that way to keep it small. But partnering with so many other great professionals to expand.
Okay. So what did it feel like joining a family business?
I'm sorry?
What did it feel like joining a business?
Oh, sure. And just to be clear, I didn't join a family business. I started my own on the separate. So I was an employee, and then I left and then went off into that. So maybe that's a little confusing, but is an entity that I started and built and continue to build and grow. And again,
So thanks for clarifying that. So tell us a little bit more about Caruso PR. And there's a lot of background noise coming in from your end. If there are any other tabs open on the laptop, it will be great if you can shut them down so we can focus.
I'm hearing that too. Hang on one second. Is that better?
Much better.
There we go. I didn't realize there was one lurking in the background. You know how that always is.
So, thank you for clarifying that, because I think the name, just because a couple of generations have been in PR prior to you, they might lead to a little bit of confusion there. So tell me a little bit more about Caruso PR. What verticals do you specialize in, and how is your approach towards different from the others in the industry?
Sure. We're small by design, a very hands-on dynamic team that works provides a full range of services. So we're able to, with our own team and also some of our stellar professional partners that we work with, are able to expand services with everyone under one roof, if you will. So it's seamless for our clients to help them achieve their goals. And those partners include, SEO, website development, photojournalism style photographers and videographer and production, SEO specialists and the like. So in addition to our services, we obviously, like most firms, have the bread and butter writing content across everything from ghostwriting articles, blogs, brochure development, other collateral materials, whether they're traditional print or digital spots, developing white papers, website copy, copywriting of all sorts, annual reports, media backgrounds. And we really shine with our media relations, of course, both developing and positioning clients as thought leaders, innovators in their product or in their area of subject expertise, whether they're talking about a service or a product. And also, we have a strong capacity to do trainings that range from spokesperson training, of course, media training, crisis management training, issues training, and also helping executives today understand the value of communications and what it means both internally and externally, and how it affects those outcomes or behaviors of their customers or clients. Because we found that so often, especially since things have become so digital, it's rather impersonal. And an example of that was we were called into working with one of the largest independent banks in the state of Illinois to give a training to that. And the executives of this bank, which were expanding rapidly, and that's how they got to be the largest one. And they originally were something that was, very old school and founded by, they had these pictures of people in practically stovepipe hats on the wall. And then when a couple of the executives says, we haven't been into a branch in, 5 years, I almost fell off my chair. So they had no idea why the customers were upset, with a lot of changes, because they hadn't experienced it. Always have to keep that customer experience in mind in the journey. So we do all of those types of things. And I think one of the unique things that we bring to our practice, I don't know how unique it is to everything, but we call it AIM. We got to take AIM with every client: audience, ideas and initiatives, and messaging, AIM. And we apply that to from the beginning of our work with the client all the way through. And it helps keep everyone on target and helps them aim for those objectives and really reach their mark of reaching those audiences and being able to pivot with the different things you need to know.
Absolutely. So coming to startup PR, yeah. How did you guys come about specializing in startup PR? And I believe you are creating a startup yourself, other than your PR firm. That's an exclusive for PRBI, right? For us to be able to talk about it. And so tell me, how did you, decide to specialize or pivot towards startup PR?
I've always been interested in what's coming next and kind of how things are working and challenges. As you mentioned, I think startup PR today, there's so many new tech companies coming out because technology is making things move faster and faster and faster. There's also a lot of physical products as well, and we certainly jump into that as well. But I think the innovation keeps coming up because startup PRs are answering the question. They're disrupting, a process of whatever and making something better, or in the technology range, pretty much changing everything, changing how you do something. I was intrigued by this, I think early on, but it was harder to do. And then at one point, I actually entered a competition for a big idea for social innovation through my alma mater, Marquette University, and earned an honorable mention, which was quite exciting. But it was a startup pitch, very much like Shark Tank oriented, as they all were at the time. But the idea was to come up with that big technology idea. So we came up with an idea and an initial business plan for a software application for adults with learning disabilities in the workplace. It was a topic that was near and dear to my heart. But then I got the bug, and I thought, and you mentioned that I've been involved in a startup myself. So instead of going off on that startup, my husband, who's an attorney, was scratching his head on a problem, and he connected with his lifelong friend, who is a software entrepreneur, And the two of them put their heads together and decided we should create this new product in the legal software field to help lawyers from discovery process through trial with new case analysis software. And so I jumped on that bandwagon and became a co-founder of that. And we're launching that as we speak. So it's very exciting. So that's 44th Street Technologies, and 44th Street is the product. So it's been interesting for me because now I'm on two sides of the table. I really understand someone's pain as a startup. I understand the delays, the time, the how the process really works to get from point A to point B. But I also understand the importance of bringing together that aim and that audience, and how you have to keep pivoting and getting to those, things to move your go forward.
Amazing. I think that would give you a very unique perspective within the startup industry as well. So my next question is towards Silicon Valley. That's the most coveted space, within the startup world as well. Can you help our audiences understand how PR can, kind of push a startup towards getting their due mileage, or getting a space, or getting a foothold in Silicon Valley?
That's an interesting question. I mean, Silicon Valley is absolutely a very coveted space, especially here in the U.S. But I have to say there has been some changes that we're seeing, and some startups are very well suited for that, and some industries, and the capital you need and the support you need, because that part of the country to even support your teams or your employees is pretty hefty because of the cost of living. So what's been happening across the country is other cities are cropping up and becoming a little bit of a contender. Boston and San Francisco have risen up to those standards, and many other cities across the Rust Belt and the Midwest, including Chicago, as well as Indiana, is really cropped up as in Cincinnati and St. Louis and other cities, become more incubators and innovation centers for technology. They're trying to support and kind of tap into that Midwestern work ethic, if you will, of getting teams together and available and talent for startups to build. And VCs are responding and starting to really like it. And I understand it's not the same, and I put in the same caliber, but it's another path. It's another path to it. So it does give people different options on how to get there, because not everyone would land in Silicon Valley, but a lot of interesting startups have come out of some of these other areas, and I think that's relatively just been cropping up slowly, and really taking some force in recent years. And
Absolutely. So, I hear a lot of PR professionals get requests from startup clients saying, we don't have budgets for advertising, we don't have budgets for digital marketing, but PR can help us, can PR help us get that coveted space, or get that coveted space in front of investors, if not Silicon Valley, right? Get the right attention. So can PR really do that?
And we think it can, because the PR is really telling your story, and investors really like to understand that they're investing in something that has impact, that can make a change or a solution, or that impact may have a positive change or a big change on someone's life, or whether it's a medical. You hear a lot about biosciences these days with everything going on, but even other fields, and how you change on things, the way things work, that are very positive. So while it's not always easy to get the founders, or even some VCs when it's early on, it is important to work with PR to start shaping that idea and developing those messages that can reach more capital, more funding resources, and just always keep your audience in mind on who your user is. If it's a tech startup, or even if it's a physical product, who the end users are and why that's important, and how that can get you there. And PR with the storytelling really can help you do that.
Absolutely, completely agree. So before we, get into different strategies that PR, startups can use in terms of PR, can you help us understand what is the lay of the land of the media landscape out there? Like, for example, in our country, there is a certain vertical of media which we call as startup media, or investor media, or entrepreneur media, right? What is it like in your country? Can you help us understand that?
Well, the U.S. media landscape is very broad and vast. on some levels. There's definitely an entrepreneur media group of, I'd say, publications or media outlets that certainly cover that. But entrepreneurism and startups and innovation are also covered through general news and general business news frequently. So it's not one vertical going across. You're taking that story to the reporters or the beats that are covering those types of stories. So it's important to understand what your product or service is and who you're trying to reach and find things that way. But it opens more doors. So it's not as segregated. At the same time, there's verticals in different specific niche industries. So if you're a biomedical company, you're going to want to reach out to people that are in that field. Or if you're specifically a biomed, say in ophthalmology or, orthopedics, you want to reach into those publications as well, and those different verticals as well. So you want to create plans that go across in those different areas. And that really helps you reach that different targets. But it's a broad and vast landscape, but people really like to hear the solutions, and humanizing the stories is really what gets their attention.
So, since you've actually worked with startups from different countries, and I understand you've also interacted with a lot of media from different continents. How does the startup media differ when you move from US to Europe to Asia?
Each country does have its nuances. I think the only consistent factors is really that they're looking for authenticity and storytelling, and wanting to hear what that story is and humanizing it in the facts. But other than that, the approach is always different. Some countries, we had a client that opened in Europe, in the UK, and we really had to start out with those one-on-one introductory meetings and try and get those kind of 10-minute calls or Zoom calls to introduce them as services. And everyone, the reporters react differently. So it's important, and with working with, I love being a member of PRBI because I have resources, and we can reach out and talk to many partners across the world and say, hey, I've got a client in XYZ and they're trying to do this. Can you give me some inside baseball, some insights that can help us help our client? And that's been fabulous and an invaluable benefit of being a member of this organization. And I think it's easier. And it's one of the reasons I actually look to join a group like PRBI, so that we would have that insight and knowledge. So,
Awesome. So, sorry, one sec. How do you typically look at approaching PR for a startup in your country? And has the last year pretty much changed that? Or has the ask from a client, is the ask from a client different now?
Interesting questions. Yes. There is no typical anything. The only typical is, just as I said before, startups are really, they provide disruptive solutions. And so telling that story and the success of that story is how you get that new idea across. Any company that has a new idea, a new way of doing something. We didn't represent Airbnb, but it's a great example, right? How do you get the story across that, gee, you should go stay in someone else's house instead of an established, clean hotel room in a specific safe with a key? So that was an interesting way to kind of get that story across, but it was told through PR, and that's how it started. And then it's blossomed, and now Airbnb has become a household, word. It has challenges with the pandemic, like everyone else, but it keeps going. I think the biggest change this year, though, has been the pandemic has caused so much disruption, business disruption, operational disruption across every industry, affecting individuals and industries everywhere, businesses. So in that regard, though, disruption creates opportunity for radical innovation products and technology, which equals new opportunities for startups. So in a way, it's not an easy path, but it is opening doors, and it's also allowing people to kind of look at whatever they had created, whether it's physical or the attributes of something that was a technical thing, and make it really fit current solutions that are global. So I think that's been a huge change. It's offered opportunity and of course, many challenges.
Every possible crisis could be an opportunity for a startup to start a new business. Keeping in mind the challenges that you faced throughout last year, what are some of the challenges specific to the startup industry that you see continuing for you in 2020?
For 2021, you mean? I'm sorry, going forward or?
Ellen, can you be a little louder?
Sure. Sorry, your last question dropped it. Could you repeat that? Could you repeat your last question? It dropped. Sorry.
Yeah. So, keeping in mind the kind of challenges that you faced last year, what are some of the challenges specific to the startup industry that you see continuing in 2021 for you?
Finding funding to keep going, scaling, and improving and growing.
Can I request you to be a little louder?
Sure.
Better.
Great. Startups are always are challenged to continually find funding resources, whether they're bootstrapping or acquiring, their own shareholders, VCs, what have you. So that's been very challenging, obviously, during the pandemic as everyone's going through this situation. And I think because of that, our startups are starting to look inward and try and focus on what's going to get that out the most. And sometimes it may slow down their production capabilities, again, whether it's a physical product or technical product, to move forward. But I think if they can double down on what it is they're trying to do and continually tell that story, they'll attract those funders that, again, really want to help and be impactful and invest in that new opportunity and new solution. That's a great way for them to push forward, and that's why I feel like it's not the only answer, of course, but it's a good tactic that we'll get from there.
Absolutely. So, can you talk to us a little bit about your biggest successful case studies last year in the startup vertical? I see a lot of fabulous case studies on your website, but I want to know something which is meatier and more recent.
Couple of success, what I would call Cinderella stories, if you will, for the startup community, because doesn't every startup want to build something and have it take off and grow and then sell it to someone that can take it even bigger? So that's very often a dream. So this wasn't exactly last year, but it was over recent years, and it's certainly relative because it is that startup story. But we worked with a technology company. When we first started working with them, they were an emerging startup, and they were in the mobile bidding technology space, serving associations and nonprofits. But basically to help raise money and move forward. So it's relevant today. But basically, when we first started working with them, they were an emerging startup that really had some traction and some market share in a very local market. Their goal initially was to go to a regional market, and obviously they really wanted to get to national. So we came on board with them, and really they just didn't have enough presence. They had recently gone through a name change. We didn't have anything to do with the name change, but we were handed it to. And so we had to really get the word out. And so we worked very closely with their marketing team and helped tell those crescendo moments, those impact stories, the milestones that they achieved each year, and help them grow and build regionally, coming away with some thought leadership cover stories in the right industries for them in front of their audiences. And that led to them being named as, I think, the Inc. 5000 list, which helped get them even more national attention. And ultimately, in a very short time, they were acquired by a national platform, which of course made the original founder very happy. And we did continue working with them as well, and do on a different level on a national scale, but it's a different story now. So that was that Cinderella startup, right? Because they started as an emerging startup and they got to where they wanted to be, and it was a very short time. It was only about 3 years. They had a little bit of sea legs before they met us, but it still was a pretty good trajectory. And a second example of something that we've worked on that really was during the pandemic was a story, and they they weren't really a startup per se because they started in 1991, but they're a technology company that had the problem of being the best industry kept secret, which is never a good thing. And they were in the IT telecom industry, which obviously had a lot of changes from 1991 to today, as everyone's realized during the past year with the pandemic, because everything's technology based and everything's becoming cloud. But before then, there were other steps in between. So we worked with this client to really help them become known in their industry, because the founder, sure. But they really wanted to solidify that and go forward. And in a period of about 4 years, we actually earned just shy of 400 earned quality media placements that that really helped shape them as with byline articles and thought leadership opportunities, speaking engagements, awards, leveraging all of those tactics, as well as parts of features, to the point where everybody comes to them and wants to have them be a part of their story and hear it. And they were able to actually launch globally during the pandemic. So, and what we did a lot during the pandemic for them is, for that client, was to ride the crest of the wave type stories, meaning how has the pandemic changed the business environment from an IT perspective. And it was a lot. In the beginning, everyone just ran, right? Everyone was sent home, so they had to do that on a dime. But we kept peeking around the corner of the pandemic and coming up with the next story, the next idea, where IT is going to have to get in there. Now, what does it look like to go back to the office? How do you bring business, or manufacture? It doesn't matter what your industry you're in. How does that look? How does your teeth fit into that? So those stories continue. So those are some.
So, while I'm sure there are a lot of things that were happening in the startup PR vertical and we left them behind, can you tell us some of the things that some of the things that have changed for the better because of the pandemic in the startup PR vertical?
It's an interesting question. I think because of the pandemic, people are looking for more solutions, and they're more open to different ways of doing things, because everything's kind of changed in so many ways. The change is now being a little bit more accepted, or people more open to it. So I think that's going to really help the startup industry in a lot of ways. They're open to new ideas.
And how has your agency changed to meet these changing demands? Have you added new verticals? Have there been changes that have been made at your end?
Sure. So we consider ourselves kind of industry agnostic, if you will. So our verticals go across everything. We've represented every, pet industry, legal industry, biosciences, nonprofits. The list goes on. Food and beverage, manufacturers. It goes on and on. So, because what we do is, especially in the B2B space, we are more prone to B2B than B2C, although we have done some B2C work, of course, but that's kind of our sweet spot. So that's really honed us in. And we do work with a lot of startups because we understand and we can demonstrate to them and show them how we take in any industry, because the tactics are the same. I think what's really changed, again, with the media landscape, it is vast, but it's knowing how to reach people as opposed to the specific person. So many people have changed chairs, if you will, during the pandemic and even before, with the challenges to the economic industry in the media in the US. There's been such a reduction of workforce, such a reduction of reporters and newspapers and magazines converging and changing, that you can't just rely on that specific relationship all the time, because it can go up in smoke overnight, unbeknownst to anyone. So knowing how to reach people and to do that is still the core and the really the crux of it. And we lean on that even more, I think, as we go forward, and that as an industry and as an agency.
What would your advice be to the entire PR industry who's there in the startup vertical? How would you recommend that they pivot towards, making sure that they not just survive but thrive in 2021?
Sure. So I think for startups in 2021 and always is really just, you have to always keep in mind to be forward thinking, kind of keep that future on the horizon all the time in view. because it really helps you keep your focus and know that you have to continually pivot to tell your story and ride the crest of the wave of whatever the situation or circumstances may be, whether they're short-term or long-term. And it really trying to find, and it's important, I think, also to kind of develop a plan to communicate both internally within a startup and externally. So many people talk about external communications as the only aspect of PR, and it's not. Internal communications is, of course, vitally important, critically important when you're starting out, because you want to make sure everyone on your team is on the right page and the same page at the right time. And without that, you can really go off on many different tangents, and all of a sudden you're throwing spaghetti against the wall instead of meeting those identifiable challenges or goals. So I think those are things that would matter.
So what about agency owners? What would your advice be to agency, owners? How would you recommend they pivot?
Pivot to start a PR or just pivot with a client? I guess that's the question.
With a client. With a client. With a client.
With the client, I think my advice, and I think most agencies understand this, that you just really have to be an active listener, really understand what's going on, absorbing what your client's industry is, and help work with them collaboratively as much as you can, really become a part of their team, really partner with them in a way to, instead of working in a silo, and really understand where they need to go, because I think that helps them pivot what they need to do to get moving forward. And your team, then your agency's personnel, can help continually pivot the tactics that you need to do. So it's a team effort, and it's a collaboration. I think that is important.
Absolutely. So while so much of pivoting is happening, it's almost like a merry-go-round happening in the startup world, and sometimes it can get really dizzy and really crazy. Knowing that so much of pivoting is happening on the client side as well as the agency side, are there any pet peeves that still exist on the startup client side? Some of the pet peeves that still exist for you.
Client side. I think communication with an agency can become a pet peeve, and it should be addressed head on. And if you approach that as an agency and a client and have an understanding of that and stay in communication with them, things will go smoother and better for the client and better for everyone to achieve, success. So I think understanding and having frequent communication with your client, understanding what's changing, and not being a nuisance, of course, but making sure that they know that you know what's going on and that you're abreast, so that again you're moving forward as a team. And I think when that doesn't happen, that can become a pet peeve of a client, because they may feel like you're behind or not understanding, or maybe not in the know or up to speed, and they're having to take time out of their busy day to bring you up to speed. Whereas if you stay in communication with them, they're better understanding of that.
Okay, let's move to the client side on the other end, right? One thing that you wished your startup clients knew about PR before they came to you.
That's a very good question. I think the biggest thing is that they really understand that PR is more than just publicity, more than just a media hit. And because if you're just measuring it like that, they're trying to measure it like an advertisement, and it's not the same. So if we can really get across that public relations is a process that involves a variety of tactics, a very big toolkit these days that can help people get a message out and help people persuade and change behaviors for all different ways, that would be amazing. But I think, and we try to educate clients all the time, but everybody comes to hiring a PR firm from a different space. But very often they're just stuck on the nugget of publicity is all that it is about, and they don't understand some of the other tactics. And very often some people are really surprised, like, oh, you would be involved in that? You really got that? So they don't see it as integral. So I think the more they would know that, the better. We try and educate clients from the time they call us for a proposal. to the time, if we start working with them and beyond, and continually educate them. But that would be something that I think would be beneficial for everyone.
So, I'm curious. I'm curious. You've been in the industry for some time now. Do you, have the education sessions not become less, or have they become more? Do you have to still keep on educating them about what is PR and what it can do for you? I would assume that because of so much of information available out there on PR and on advertising and on digital, that the need for an education session with clients on PR would have reduced. Has that not been your experience, or has it doubled or tripled?
That is also a very interesting question. And it does vary on a client or on a person that you're talking with. But I do think education really matters. You're right. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information on the internet. Some is good, some is different. And so I think it is important, and not formally educating. I'm not talking about sitting down and doing a webinar, but constantly reminding and, putting that into your tactics and your planning and your discussions helps. It helps them really understand. And very often when you're working with a client, you're working with their marketing team, which could consist of everyone from a VP down to a coordinator level. And what their knowledge is going to vary. And it really is important for everyone on that team to understand what you can do, what you are doing, and how this is going to really help move their company forward.
I'm assuming that yes, you'll be dealing with a lot of different people, but somehow I have found myself doing more of these sessions just because of the fact there is so much more information that is available. There are not a lot of people who will help them make sense of it. So that typically becomes the role of the PR professional who is actually working or engaging with them to be able to help them understand what PR can do and what are the differences between each of the communication verticals as such. So I'm going to dial back to your entire career. I want to know about your biggest and most scariest startup PR crisis management moment. What was it? How did you handle it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question as well. And I don't really think I've had startup crisis per se, because part of our tactics is to really address the elephant in the room before it happens. And what we like to do with the startup PR is really let them know that not only is it important to develop a PR strategy to move forward with your product planning, but to also have a crisis plan in place from the get-go. Because no matter what you're doing, something's going to go wrong. It's just a matter of when it's going to go wrong and exactly what it is. But having those elements in place and understanding the need and the necessity for that will really avoid something that could be a disaster and really blow up an emerging startup or a young company. So having that, we've turned it around there. So we haven't really had startups that have gone into that crisis mode, but we've helped them protect themselves and build that into their aura from the get-go.
That's a very, very wise strategy to have. It's interesting that none of your startups have faced a crisis just because of the fact that you've done a preemptive strike, right? Very interesting. So tell me, when startups come to you, right? What is your advice to them in terms of when they should actually be starting PR? Because they believe, whenever there are different sets or different mindsets between entrepreneurs who start up interesting ventures. And while some view a startup just with the purpose of creating visibility or publicity, there are others who really want to make things work. So is there a point, that you kind of create a milestone for them that this is when you need to start PR, not before that? Have you ever had to turn back a client because they were not ready for PR?
Yeah, that's also that just happened recently. Actually, it's very interesting. We were approached by a technology firm that's actually, I would call it emerging because they're not brand new startup, and they're international and global, and they're in a different market, and they were entering in Chicago, and they were actually looking to partner with a Chicago firm. So part of our process when we first hear from a startup firm is to do a little vetting ourselves before we decide to really pour in a little effort for that proposal. And so we rolled up our sleeves a little bit, did a little homework, took a look at the market on where they're doing, had a couple of calls, actually. We went back to them for another question or two because we weren't finding, an answer, and there were a few things that they had mentioned. So, and we basically gave them our honest opinion that we don't think we could be of value or help to you at this time for your product in your service in the community which you're trying to enter for these various reasons. And we gave them some examples. And they actually thanked us for being very thoughtful and providing them with that insight. And they're going to use that as part of their evaluation on what they're going to do. And we're not saying we're going to make their decisions for them, but, and then, we'll see maybe in the future. So it was an interesting process, and it's one that literally happened 2 weeks ago. So, and it was a big company, and it's nice to be asked, but sometimes you really have to get in there because you don't want to start a relationship as a PR firm with a client. We don't. We always try. We feel it is a partnership. So we really like to find clients that we can be successful for them. And if we don't think we can, we'll either be upfront about them and tell them that and why, or suggest someone else for them, and where to go. And we've been recipients of that as well. So if we feel like it's turnabout is fair play. So that's something that we do a lot. But for most startups, I really think to start thinking the perfect moment to start PR is prior to your launch, because PR is much more than just the publicity. PR is understanding your message. It's developing and shaping that audience and knowing that you'll have different messages and different paths with those audience. So developing a PR strategy can be critical. So it's better to do it before you launch because you get one first impression and you want to put on your best Sunday clothes, right? So you want to make sure that you're able to do that hitting out the park. So that's what we always tell them.
Awesome. So, the PR, I think within the PR industry as well, startup PR is a very dynamic, very fast-paced vertical as such. So I do believe that, PR professionals, in fact, agency owners who specialize in startup PR have to have a certain skill set to be able to handle that. So what, according to you, would be the top 3 skills that, somebody who's handling a startup should have, a PR professional who's handling a startup should have?
Being an active listener with critical thinking skills, with that vision to understand creative opportunities and kind of analyze what your startup or your potential startup is talking about, coupled with very strong storytelling skills. So I think those are the components that I would say would be the top skills.
Absolutely. I think that's very relevant advice for anybody who wants to get into startup PR. So what would your advice be to the graduating class of 2021 who's actually entering the industry right now? What would be your recommendations to them?
I mean, I think we bring in young folks a lot, and we have interns that are college students. We've been interacting with them for many years. I think my best advice is, in school, you're going to learn a lot about tactics and a lot about the technology impact that's in the public relations industry. I mean, they didn't have public relations majors when I was going through my formal education. And I think don't get caught up in those tactics because they're going to change. I mean, nobody heard of half of them 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and I guarantee you in another couple of years, we'll have some more that we've never heard of as well. But what I would advise is to become that sponge. Learn to absorb information on a subject matter that's going to drive forward a client that you're working on, or if you're working in-house at a company, with those in-house topics. Understand how you can find out more and start thinking out of the box. Develop those critical thinking skills with a client in mind. That's going to help you pick up the right tactics and execute them going forward.
When it comes to startup PR, experience versus freshness, right? Or what wins? What does a startup, value when it looks at PR and says, do I need to hire somebody who's been in the industry for 20 years and has handled several startups? Or do I need to hire somebody who has 1 or 2 years of experience and probably would have fresher ideas, right? So what wins when you look at, realistically, you look at a startup pitch, what wins in a startup pitch?
Good question too. I would like to say both. I'd like to say someone that is experienced but has those fresh creative ideas, because there's no reason why if you have experience, you should as we do, we look at every opportunity and every startup with fresh eyes. What is a fresh way to do this? We don't cookie cutter and pull things off the shelf, so to speak. So I think that's what people should be looking for. And those that, have that. Now, that said, there's, some folks that are just getting in the PR industry and they have to build that experience. But that's where I say lean into mentors to them and find ways to build that experience and partner with others to really gain it and really push forward. But I think when you're talking with a client, just look for those. You want to look for someone that has both experienced in public relations, so you really understand what you're doing, and also the ability to, with fresh eyes, come up with a fresh approach and avoid cookie cutters, because you're not going to get very far with that.
True. So let me rephrase that question, right? How do you keep the freshness alive with experience?
So we keep the freshness alive with experience by constantly thinking forward, thinking outside that box. Again, looking at what's going on in the world around you, in the world around your client, and what they're trying to achieve or solve as a problem, and find different ways, following the crest of the wave stories of what's going on, from as big as that pandemic to, let's say it was an ordinary time and it was just a hurricane, or, right now that seems mild, even though that's very dramatic as well, or any other situation, you know what I'm saying? So it just to keep your eyes and ears open and always be fresh in that way, and really take in the trends that are happening in your client's industry and the world around you, and how you can put those and layer those together to come up with a fresh approach.
Absolutely. So has PRBI helped you in, retaining or creating that brain trust for fresh ideas?
Oh, yes. PRBI, Public Relations Boutiques International, has been it's a joyous part of our days, really. We love it. We love the brain trust. We love the camaraderie. We love the opportunity to have a sounding board when you have an idea and you just want to take something out and try it up for size. You gain that experience that others have gone there and save some time with some vetting. And, it's been great. It's wonderful to meet people like yourself from around the world. I just love it. I can't wait till we can all travel again and see each other in person. That was always a pleasure as well. And just really using those relationships eventually on different clients when it's appropriate. But even if it's not, it's been a wonderful, it is a wonderful organization and a value for PR firms to become a member.
Awesome. So my last question for today, right? We're running out of time. And it's already an hour. Yeah. So, if there was one advice that you could give your younger self, if you were to start all over again, what would that one piece of advice be?
So that's a tough question. I think my younger self would just be, follow your gut, follow your instincts, and do what you want to do earlier. I think just times where things took a little longer to get things going. And I think that would be if I went back and talked to my younger self with, this is what you think you want to do it now, instead of, kind of waiting longer. That's that hindsight bit, right? But really just continuing to really understand, and you may not know it at a time, but mentorship is so important. And you may not know it at the time, but the people that you meet along the way professionally and even personally that you can bring into a mentoring role as that sounding board, groups like PRBI, but even individuals, along the way, build those, treasure those, and keep those relationship fires burning.
So thank you so much for taking out time today to speak to us and sharing your insights on startup PR. Really appreciate the time you took out today to, speak to all of us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to do this, and it was
awesome. If you remain in the studio for a minute, I will say goodbye to our viewers, talk about the next session, and we chat.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, so guys, that was Ellyn, our PRBI member, Ellyn Caruso, speaking to us about startup PR and what you need to do to keep up. Thank you again for joining us today for the session. We will see you again at our next live session on 5th February 2021, with a PRBI member from Finland. Sounds interesting? Join us. Till then, you can view all our live sessions on Facebook or on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions for any of our experts, then drop us a note in the comment section and we will answer them for you. See you for the next